My name is Rachel Rofe. I created this show because I wanted to help you see that if you have a choice, you can choose a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in a pretty fortunate position. You have free will, ability to connect to the internet, and access to all kinds of new education. This podcast is meant to help you make the most of your good fortune. We talk with all kinds of people here from all walks of life because I want you to see that no matter what your situation, there's always a way to create a life that you're proud of. Welcome to part one of a conversation with Tony Stubblebine, the founder of Coach.me, formerly Lyft. So this conversation went so well. It was going to be a shorter podcast episode. We ended up talking for 2 hours, and so I broke this into 2 different episodes. The first one is mostly about creating goals and making them so that they actually happen, how to incorporate habits, what to do when you're not feeling motivated. And then the second half, it varies a little bit, but it was kind of started as how he was able to get hundreds of thousands of people onto his app and different business building things, how he was able to get these amazing investors, because Tony has investors in his app like Tony Robbins, Tim Ferriss, the founders of Twitter, Ev Williams, and Biz Stone. He's now helped hundreds of thousands of people achieve their goals. So all kinds of goals ranging from productivity to fitness to stopping drinking to meditation. He's helped so many people and had such a big impact. We are going to cover so much. So in this part of the interview, part one, we're going to talk about how to set goals that you can actually make happen. What are the biggest things to incorporate if you want to make sure that you're actually going to reach the goals that you set? What the biggest bang for your buck habits are. And I asked because Tony has so much data, having helped hundreds of thousands of people, what those are. So he shares that, the people that reach their goals versus those that don't, different things to do when you're not feeling motivated. So this is really cool. And this is more a conversation style, I think, than most of my shows. I mean, I try to make them all conversation style, but this was very organic and we got so much great stuff. So here we go on to part one. Enjoy. Tony, thanks so much for being here.
Rachel, thank you for having me. I feel like it's a really awesome day, and I'm looking forward to talking about my favorite subject, being awesome. Let's do it.
Awesome. Me too. So the question I start out asking everybody is, the intention behind the show, A Better Life, is to show people that if they have a choice, they can choose a better life. So in that spirit, can you just take a moment to share some of the things that you're most proud of in your life?
I think the thing that I think about with pride all the time is having been able to create a life of meaning. And I feel like, when I was younger, and this is true for almost all young people, there's this really strong desire to just prove that you belong. So I graduated college as a computer science major, and my career started out as a programmer, and the only thing that I cared about when I first got my first job was prove that I was a capable programmer. And then it just started, dawning on me, what was I working on, and did my work matter? And that thought grew and grew and grew, and so I would look at my whole career trajectory as just trying to find work that had more and more meaning. And now I'm in this position with Coach.me where we're literally working on helping people achieve their goals. I cannot think of a more meaningful way to spend my career. And I feel like, wow, it took me 15 years of work, but I do now finally have meaningful work, and I feel like it's work I could do for the rest of my life. And I just think I have an incredible amount of pride, or maybe pride's not the right word, but just personal satisfaction. When I lie down in bed at the end of the night, I'm happy because I know that I did meaningful work. And all the other anxiety that I think a lot of business owners have, and certainly I had the last time I started a business, around will it succeed? It just that's a manageable anxiety for me because I feel like there's meaning behind it, at least. Does that make sense?
I think so, but I'd love to dig in a little more. When you say, will it succeed, and you feel like it's meaningful, can you just say a little bit more about that? I guess, does meaningful trump success to you, or you just know because it's meaningful it will succeed?
But it balances the two. I'm curious how you feel, or how the other entrepreneurs who might be listening feel about the kind of the emotional ride of starting a business. And especially in the beginning, you just have to go on faith, and that makes it very challenging emotionally. And I feel like the best thing that I ever learned was that that if I cared about what I was doing, if I at least felt like I was doing good in the world, I'm not going to be I wouldn't be terribly upset if like some of my investors didn't get our money back, or if I didn't, it wasn't a huge success. The story I usually tell goes back to my last company, which is like I feel like I was much more a traditional entrepreneur in that I was defined mostly by just being hard-headed. And I had no real special skills that allowed me to start this company. I just decided I'm going to start a company. I started building software, and then I started looking for people to buy this software. And I'd never done sales, I'd never done marketing, I had no idea what I was doing. But eventually I found this little niche selling software to conferences to help the attendees network with each other. And the whole time I was doing that, I just kept telling myself, like, I refuse to fail. I refuse to fail. I'm going to find a way to do this. And it was just like, I was stressed all the time. And I let myself go in like every way. Like I wasn't exercising, I wasn't eating well. I was probably kind of a pain to be around. And that lasted about 3 years. And then in the 4th year, we succeeded. We had enough customers that I was able to hire a team around me. Mostly the team did all the work. I basically was working about a day a week on this company, and it was offering a good lifestyle. I was splitting my during this time, my partner Sarah and I decided to split our time between San Francisco and New York. So I could afford to live in like the 2 most expensive housing cities in the country. And I had a lot of leisure time. But it let me then reflect on why I had beat myself up so badly in order to start this company. And it dawned on me that I had no innate interest in conferences. And I didn't think really the impact on the world was particularly big. And so why would I continue to invest in this? And frankly, why did I invest in it the first time? And that was like this big epiphany for me that led to starting Coach.me, which actually originally has its own, very difficult path. We had a really tough go of it for a couple of years until recently, where it's like really turned around and it's been a great business. But that difficult road, the reason I was able to persist through it is because I just loved the topic, as a sort of the topic of elite performance. How do people really push the envelope of human potential and their own personal potential? I love that. Like every day someone is saying to me, thank you, you changed my life. And that satisfaction is what makes the rest of the business, which I have a lot of anxiety around whether or not something is going to work, and there's a ton of failure involved in starting. Like a lot of things we try just don't work. And how do you manage that failure? How do you manage all of the stress that comes with the business? The lesson I learned is you have to have an alignment around your personal life mission and what you're working on in the business.
I think that's a really good point. And just so people can get the background, can you tell us about what your app is and what it does?
Right. So the history of this company is we'd originally started as a goal tracking community. It's actually, we'd had a ton of visibility early on and built a huge community around it because of who we were collaborating with. The first investor that we worked with was this guy, Evan Williams, who was the former CEO of Twitter. And this project, which at the time was called Lyft, was the first project that he worked on after leaving Twitter. So like the tech press just really paid a lot of attention to it at the beginning, and we were able to build a pretty large community around it and help a lot of people mostly form new habits. But then we felt like we weren't going deep enough. We didn't feel like we really had a business there. We weren't sure, at some point in San Francisco, you can get pretty far with people just giving you money and funding you that way. But at some point, you have to make a real business out of it. And what it turned out is that we had this huge community of existing and potential coaches. And we started taking our most successful people in the community and training them to be digital coaches, to coach people online rather than through like face-to-face sessions. And that just it worked. It worked incredibly well, and so at the beginning of this year, we made a huge reboot of the company, the different name. We're now called Coach.me. We're very much focused on providing personal coaching to everyone in the world, and being a coaching platform for both sides. So if you're looking for a coach, you can find great coaches on our platform, and the same if you're interested at all in taking your expertise and coaching people in your spare time, either as a full-time coach, or a lot of our coaches really work part-time. It's just one aspect of what they do professionally. Then we match those two audiences up as a marketplace, essentially.
Awesome. So I know that you used your app the person who coordinated this podcast interview, Debbie, was telling me that basically you went from being tired and out of shape to completing 4 triathlons last year, which is awesome. So I'm curious, how were you able to get from where you were to where you are now? How were you able to figure out the right steps, break down your habits, and then use your app to make that happen?
Right. I feel like there's some corollary to the guy who does the hair club for men ads, right? Where at the end of the ad he says, I'm not only the president, I'm also a member, and he shows you a picture of what he used to look like, right? Like I am very much the active user of Coach.me, where I felt like my what I was getting done in my life was not matching my ambitions for what I wanted to get done. And I really wanted to build a support structure that would let me do it. And so what that structure really looks like is to break down every goal and focus first on consistency. Because if you can consistently work towards your goal, you give yourself a lot of opportunity to grow skills around that. And I think this is probably the number one area where people fail, is they try to go for an overnight success. There's a phrase that I really like from one of our investors who was also one of the Twitter founders, and he said, "It took me 10 years to become an overnight success." And I feel like that sums up exactly what we've learned about anything self-improvement related. So when we started, we based a lot of our support structure around a applied psychologist at Stanford, this guy BJ Fogg. And the two concepts that get used a lot is he uses this concept of tiny habits, that just to really aggressively go for consistency first. And he uses this example around flossing, which I think is good it's illustrative, although not particularly inspiring, which is if you want to start a flossing habit, floss one tooth and make that your habit. And most people will end up flossing all of their teeth, but it's more important that you build that habit than it is that you floss all your teeth every time. Because most people go down this path with any new goal where they do a really good job once and then never do it again. And just to really flip that around and go consistency first. All of the tools in our app and all of the coaching, works on that idea of breaking your goal down into kind of a minimal practice that you can do every day. The other thing that we work on a lot is this idea that it's not a motivation problem, it's an ability problem. So a ton of people, you see this a lot in addiction, right? Like say something like people who are trying to quit smoking. Like non-smokers often try to tell smokers how unhealthy smoking is, as if smokers have never heard that before, right? It's like, no, they know that it's unhealthy. The problem is that it's very hard to stop smoking. And so, something like a nicotine patch, right? That's the other approach where they're trying to break the habit by making it easier to break the habit rather than by trying to increase motivation. So where this comes up in real life is often it comes up in the environment. So it's something like I used to live in this great area for bike riding. I commuted on my bike. I was riding my bike through vineyards every day. It was so beautiful. And then now I live in the city. I'm not so keen on the bike commute. I'm working a lot during daylight hours. And so you could say, well, maybe I should just suck it up and wake up at 6 a.m. and go for a bike ride every day. Or is there a way I could make going for a bike ride easier? And the way that I made it easier is, I have a gym literally across the street from my office that has good hours, and I'm just often on I get my bike riding in on their stationary bikes in the evening. And so it wasn't the solution is not motivation based. We would say it's ability based. And I think that's really kind of making it easier for myself to exercise and focusing on consistency above all else. That is really how I got back into some level of fitness. I'm really psyched with my year. 2 years ago, I couldn't swim more than a lap. And, in this past year, I did 4 triathlons, and hopefully I have a couple more coming up in August and September. And it all came from really just trying to make it easier to exercise and really trying to get consistent. And of course, I've got this innate ambition that if I have time, I will go for very hard workouts. But I wasn't giving myself room for that ambition to take over because I didn't have the consistency ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so then I'm curious, in terms of what were the action steps you were taking every day, especially because I've read some of your stuff before where you talk about having one priority is so important. And I know with the triathlons, there's all different types of things you need to do. How are you breaking that out?
I love one priority as a much more effective way to frame prioritization. So, when we work with people on productivity, they start out thinking, I need to make a to-do list and check off as much as possible. And that just ends up becoming overwhelming. And then also they end up working on things that don't particularly matter. So they never really get out of the rut of feeling like they're not achieving enough. And so usually the first switch people make is instead of focusing on a to-do list, they focus on a priority list. But then if you don't force any constraint on that priority list, people will come out and say, well, I've got 10 top priorities. And then they'll still feel overwhelmed, and that feeling of being overwhelmed will create paralysis. I know I definitely often get less done when I have more goals. And so the one priority framing of it is pick a top priority every day and get it done as quickly as possible. And that's just another way of thinking of consistency, or sometimes we use the word momentum, right? It's if you consistently get your top priority every day, you're creating momentum for yourself every day, and that momentum, just will keep going. You'll get more done. And so, really, my triathlon goal is not a finely tuned workout plan. It's go to the gym, right? Go to the gym every day that I can. And for a while it was 3 days a week because I was so out of shape that I was so exhausted. I needed multiple days of rest every time I worked out. And now it's go 5 days a week because that's about what works with my schedule. But that's an example of a tiny habit. It's much more important that I walk into the gym than it is that I have a detailed training plan at any given point. And by the way, I come from a background where I'm used to having detailed training plans. I have a competitive running background, and I always my coaches always gave us super detailed months-long training plans where I could tell you on September 17th that exactly what my workout would be, what pace I was supposed to be going at, and how much rest I would have in between intervals usually. And that would be great, and I think that's appropriate when you're at that level. This is sort of this question: how do you get from beginner to that level? How do you get from couch to 5K? And a lot of goals. You're starting at that beginner level, and you have to build up the consistency first. And so, for me, as my first year in triathlon, while running a company and living bicoastally and having a ton going on in my life, the the action step is really no more complicated than go to the gym. And I've made that as easy as possible. I already said the gym is across the street, but on top of that,